The family and friends of Tyre Nichols will say their final goodbyes today, 3 weeks after he died from a brutal beating by Memphis police.
My brother was the most peaceful person you ever met
That's
in
right.
your life. Most. He's never lifted a finger to nobody. Never raised his voice to nobody. If my brother was here today and if he had to say something, he would tell us to do this peacefully.
Nichols' brother among those who gathered at a church last night. His 29-year-old brother was beaten after a traffic stop. 5 officers have been fired and charged with murder, and 2 more officers are suspended. A number of high-profile names are expected at the funeral today. The White House confirming that Vice President Kamala Harris will be attending, and she'll be joined by former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms and members of George Floyd's family. Reverend Al Sharpton will eulogize Nichols. Joining us now for more is Dion Lassiter, national expert on race relations and executive director of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. Welcome to the program. Thanks so much for taking the time today.
Good morning, and thank you for having me, albeit these sombering conditions that we find ourselves in.
Once again, I have to say that we're finding us in this situation once again. I want to get your reflections on that because we are going to see members of George Floyd's family at the funeral today.
As a social worker, for me, I'm very careful to articulate that I'm hoping that everyone engages in a form of self-care who have experienced the loss of a loved one. I'm reminded of the family and the community of Eric Garner. You just mentioned George Floyd. So those who are going to be at the funeral, and though Al Sharpton is going to be delivering the eulogy, I hope that the eulogy is mixed with truth, love, and kindness, but also praying for not only Tyre Nichols' family, but also those individuals who have lost loved ones because of state-sanctioned violence against the backdrop of a potential form of traumatization that may be activated by being at the funeral today.
Chad, I want to ask you what you are hoping the conversation that comes from today's funeral, from the grief, from the shock, and from the frustration. What comes from those discussions?
I think the conversations have to be ongoing. I think that we have to do the work prior to police stops. I think it's more than just sensitivity training. There's no amount of anti-racism training, DEI training, unconscious bias training that are going to change the hearts and the minds and the deeply embedded stereotypes that are running rampant in multiple and varying law enforcement agencies. We have to deal with white supremacy. We have to deal with white supremacy ideology. We have to deal with systemic and structural racism. We have to deal with the fact that there is anti-blackness as it relates to anti-black racism. We're not saying all officers, but we have to really start looking at where we are in the United States as it relates to the way we view Black and brown people, and specifically African-American males. We look at them from a deficit model. We render them non-person, non-entity, and then law enforcement, whether they are Black or white, engage in these horrific behaviors. So it has to be also on a macro level. We need the George Floyd Policing Act passed. It does not need to be stalled in the Senate. We need to also look at this whole aspect of why are people running? When we have these incidences, we tend to simply say we want to have peaceful protests. We would not have to have any protests whatsoever if these occurrences were not happening. Unarmed individuals who are on the Black side of the color line losing their lives in such a violent way. And then the police officers are engaged in erroneous data with the police report that is just rife with nothing but falsities.
Chad, today is the first day of Black History Month. Are you hoping that in some way serves as a catalyst for these conversations that you're hoping to see in your country?
That's a profound question. I don't get seduced by a particular month, but you're absolutely right that Black History Month today starts. But Black History Month is part and parcel of the American story. It's part of the landscape. America is a kaleidoscope made up of beautiful Jewish people, made up of beautiful white people, made up of beautiful African Americans, Asian American, Pacific Islanders, Latinos, Native American, Indigenous. And so Black History Month is every month. It's every day. It's 365 days a year, just like every other race and ethnicity. What I'm reminded of is the beloved community espoused by Martin Luther King Jr. and Rabbi Abraham Yeshua Heschel, that we must operate from a perspective of truth, love, and kindness. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it continues to bend towards justice. Justice is what Dr. King verbalized. And so I'm in a place of just in prayer for our country, our law enforcement, because there are multiple law enforcement individuals who put their lives on the line every single day under the guise of the fear of calamity. And it's those indifferent officers, like these 5 Black officers, but also the white officers who killed Eric Garner and the white officer Derek Chauvin who killed George Floyd, who taint the job and the identity of a police officer in America. But there is an anthology of police brutality that is long lasting in the epoch of the American story. I don't know what the answers are, but I know that truth, love, and kindness, and creating the beloved community and activating policies that make sure that we get to the underpinnings of the white supremacist ideology that oftentimes runs rampant in law enforcement is something that we need to begin to do, and we need to do it in an earnest and protracted way.
Chad, Dion Lassiter, national expert on race relations and executive director of the Pennsylvania Human Rights Relations Commission. Thank you so much for taking the time to join with us today for this conversation, Chad, and we thank you for your insights as well.
Thank you for having me.